When Vince McMahon retired recently, there was a huge spat of online discourse about how Vinnie Mac was this big genius of the wrestling world and perhaps the greatest mind to ever tackle the sport. Vince McMahon sure had a lot of big W's in his wrestling career, but he also had a lot of huge L's. Like, massive L's. L's so big that King Kong would try and scale them while swatting away biplanes. You see, there are a lot of wrestlers in the history of this mad world in which we, the fans, loved and wanted to see pushed to the moon. But Vince McMahon, the supposed genius that he was, didn't get and decided instead to give us more John Cena or whatever stupid gimmick he was into that week. Guys that could have been big or major players for WWE that would have made massive money, but Vinnie Mac just didn't get. I'm Tempest hailing from partsFUNknown, and these are 10 wrestlers Vince McMahon never got. And before we get on with our list, make sure that you subscribe and enable notifications to always on so you never miss a fun wrestling list just like it. And make sure that you watch Survival Series, our new hit show here on partsFUNknown. I'm a big fan of it, and I think you will be too. Honorable mention, Raven. Fun fact, WWE is the only major company to not have a version of Raven's Flock, an easy-to-book faction that had brilliant main event feuds in ECW and mid-card feuds in TNA and WCW. And why didn't WWE have this version of Raven? This silver-tongued devil who had a menagerie of misfits surrounding him to do his bidding? Because Vince McMahon made him a homeless man. No, really, Vince McMahon is a f***ing idiot. Signed, Luke Owen. Number 10. Broken Matt Hardy. When both Matt and Jeff Hardy made the return to the house that Vinnie Mac built in 2017, a lot had changed for brother Matthew. Despite wrestling for 2 decades by that point, in 2016 Matt would undergo a drastic character reinvention while working for Impact, becoming a broken version of himself with a wacky new accent, disheveled bleached hair, and a whole universe of props and characters that included a dilapidated boat, a mower of lawns, and the Vanguard 1 holographic drone. Alright, maybe it's obvious why Vince McMahon didn't get the character now. Matt would eventually have the opportunity to apply his broken universe to the WWE by the end of 2017, but it was a much less ambitious version of the character than what we had seen. He played chess with Napoleon, reincarnated as a goldfish, but he wasn't treated with anywhere near the level of importance he was in Impact, losing to Bray Wyatt in a matter of minutes on Raw 25. He did get a chance to main event Raw with the Ultimate Deletion match against Bray, however, that's about as good as it ever got for the WWE version of Broken Matt. Michael Cole, literally before the match started, effectively apologized for what we were about to watch, right there on TV. Vince McMahon told us that he thought this was shit and you're an idiot if you liked it. And if that's not enough, on the Talk is Jericho podcast, Matt recalled Vince watching it in the gorilla position and outright saying, "I don't get it." So if that's not enough to earn Matt a place on this list, I don't know what is. Number 9, Christian. Similarly to Matt Hardy, Christian was someone that gained a lot of success in WWE throughout the company's most successful periods of the late 90s and early 2000s, predominantly in the tag division with his kayfabe brother Edge. And, also like Matt Hardy, Vince saw his brother as the bigger star. While Edge would go on to establish himself as one of the most successful single competitors in company history, Christian would be forced to forge a path outside of WWE to be viewed the same way. Christian would find success across in TNA, winning their big one on 2 separate occasions. Why did Christian struggle to find similar success in WWE? One contributing factor, Vince thought he was ugly to the point that Vince famously wanted to put a blue dot over Christian's face whenever he was on screen. And if you ever need more of a reason to believe that Vince McMahon put on shows just to entertain himself, during the Abraham Washington show in 2009, remember him, AW went off on one about how ECW champion Christian was ugly. AW the ventriloquist doll puppeting Vince's madness and revealing to the world why Christian continued to struggle in Vince's company. Number 8, Dusty Rhodes. Polka dots. Need I continue? Arriving in the WWF in 1989 is one of wrestling's biggest names after hugely successful stints in the NWA and Jim Crockett Promotions in particular, Vince seemed to be out to sabotage the American dream from the word go. The polka dots were perhaps a way to stick it to the man who worked for his competitors for so long, but regardless, Dusty took them in stride and still remained massively over. Rhodes would unfortunately reach nowhere near the same level of success, however, and would finish his active wrestling career in fairly unmemorable fashion. Dusty was approaching the end of his active in-ring career by the time he arrived in the WWF, so was unlikely to be pushed to the main event during the era of Hulk Hogan and the Ultimate Warrior. However, his treatment seemed awfully counterproductive for Vince, as he was still such an asset despite his age. Dusty would leave in 1991 to become a booker for WCW, an occasional on-screen character, only eventually returning to work for Vince in 2005. This time around, Dusty was rightfully celebrated for his legacy and would become a key figure behind the early days of NXT until his passing in 2015. Number 7, Cesaro. In late 2014, Vince McMahon appeared on the WWE Network's Stone Cold podcast and implored talents such as Cesaro to grab the infamous brass ring. According to McMahon, the reason for Cesaro's lack of a serious push by that point was because he lacked it. Quote unquote, it. Yeah, okay, Vince. Let's just ignore the fact that Cesaro was easily one of the most over talents on the roster earlier that same year when he won the Andre the Giant Memorial Battle Royal. The aforementioned Battle Royal win seemed destined to be the catapult for Cesaro to get to the main event spot that he so rightly deserved, but instead, it led to an ill-advised heel run and partnership with Paul Heyman. While Cesaro could have undoubtedly benefited from having a legendary mouthpiece like Heyman by his side, he always felt like an afterthought to Brock Lesnar throughout this run and was never quite Heyman's main attraction. In the years following this, Cesaro would achieve success, most notably perhaps as one half of the Bar with Sheamus, but he would only get very minuscule tastes of the main event scene prior to his departure in 2022. Cesaro had all the tools to become a main event presence in WWE. Curse you, Vince. You are the one that dropped the ball. Number 6, Diamond Dallas Page. Following WWE's victory in the Monday Night Wars against WCW, it was inevitable that Vince would look to ingest as much of the former competition's talent as he could to bolster his roster. That is, if their contract wasn't too big, in which case, by all means, sit out. However, as we've already learned, Vince McMahon is a very, very petty man. And when it came to the WCW roster, it was evident that he rarely ever wanted them to look as strong as his WWF loyalists. There was perhaps no greater example of this than Diamond Dallas Page. A WCW mainstay and former 3-time World Heavyweight Champion, Page was a perennial babyface and an unlikely star for Ted Turner's company. So, given the popularity of Page, what kind of character would Vince McMahon design for Page's eventual debut? Any guesses? Well, if you said creepy voyeuristic stalker, then you are correct. Bafflingly, Page debuted as the mystery stalker of The Undertaker's then wife Sarah, who had been the subject of unsettling video camera recording vignettes for months. After revealing his identity on the June 18, 2001 episode of Raw, to a massive pop by the way, DDP revealed he only stalked Taker's wife to get to the dead man, who proceeded to destroy Page in the subsequent feud. And that was that, really. Page went on to do not much else of note in his short WWE tenure, save for a brief run with the European Championship, before sadly being forced to retire due to a neck injury in April 2002. The real kicker here is that Page took a massive pay cut to come to the WWF for the invasion. He could have sat on his Turner contract like Hall, Nash, Goldberg, and Hogan did, but he wanted to wrestle for Vince, and this is how Vince repaid him for it. Number 5, Taz. Yet another popular act from a rival company, Taz, despite a relatively small stature, was a man to be feared during his time in ECW. The Human Suplex Machine was a legit badass that carried himself as such and would become one of Paul Heyman's biggest success stories, winning pretty much every title he had to offer across a 6-year spell in ECW. Taz's WWF debut at the 2000 Royal Rumble might be the most perfect wrestling debut ever. He came out to a huge New York pop, he destroys the unbeaten Kurt Angle and puts him to sleep with an illegal chokehold, but the problem was, he came from ECW, which means Vince took one look at him and said, well, you're the hardcore guy now then. So Taz went from beating the unbeatable future WWF champion to feuding with the Big Boss Man and Prince Albert. Next thing you know, that's it for Taz. He teamed with fellow ex-ECW alumni Raven for a forgettable tag run, and then, just 1 year after an incredible debut in the Rumble, he was eliminated from the 2001 Royal Rumble in a matter of seconds with a sign that said, "My crap is bigger than Taz," which might as well have been written by Vince McMahon himself. As previously mentioned, Taz was not the biggest individual, and in the land of the giants, this is always likely to work against you. After numerous injuries, Taz would successfully transition to commentary and become a staple of the SmackDown booth alongside Michael Cole. As good as Taz was and still is at commentary, it is hard not to ask what if when it came to his in-ring WWE career. Number 4, Zack Ryder. When it comes to who gets pushed in WWE, very rarely did Vince McMahon not have 99.99% of the say in things. So, if you're not seen as a star in his eyes, I hope you enjoy sitting in catering, pal. Nobody perhaps fit this bill more than Zack Ryder, or maybe Primo or JTG. For real, it felt like those two were employed forever, and to Zack Ryder's credit, however, he was not simply content with languishing away. Instead, he would start up his very own YouTube channel and begin a series known as Z True Long Island Story. The series garnered Ryder a massive following throughout 2011, leading to fans hijacking shows with "We Want Ryder" chants until WWE were forced to take notice. Now you've got to remember, this was before YouTube was this major thing that it is now, and wrestling Twitter was still in its infancy. However, we were hastily reminded that more often than not, if you go against the will of Vince McMahon and get yourself over organically without WWE's backing, you will duly be brought back down to earth. Despite throwing Ryder a bone by giving him a United States Championship run in late 2011, he was well and truly dismantled and humiliated on TV constantly in early 2012, specifically throughout John Cena's rivalry with Kane and on-screen romance with Eve Torres. The icing on the cake was getting kicked square in the gonads by Torres at WrestleMania 28, effectively extinguishing the Ryder fire for good and sending him back to catering for 8 more years. WWE spent all of 2011 burying Twitter because guys like Ryder got over because of it, then fast forward 1 year and they're slapping the trending sticker over the end of an era segment like that's what matters at that moment. Had Ryder gotten himself over on Tout, maybe things would have been different. Number 3, The Fiend. After 6 years of character mismanagement, the spring of 2019 saw a true revival for Bray Wyatt. No longer the swamp-dwelling cult leader, and instead a children's TV show host carrying extremely unsettling undertones, the birth of the Firefly Funhouse was a breath of fresh air for Bray and WWE, though it should be noted that the Firefly Funhouse was literally born out of those 6 years of bad booking. At the center of all of it, however, was Bray's new alter ego, The Fiend, who provided one of the most truly unsettling character designs in wrestling history and gave Bray a new horror villain character that was simply indestructible. That is, unless you're going up against a 53-year-old Goldberg. Oh yes, in what is still arguably one of the worst booking decisions of all time, The Fiend was fed to Oldberg after months of dominance. Just baffling. Proving precisely why The Fiend should have been kept away from the title scene in the first place, the mystique of the character was damaged beyond repair at that moment, and that was a few months after the Hell in a Cell debacle. And it's not even getting into the maddening Randy Orton storyline that went on for months and had no satisfying conclusion outside of Randy Orton squashing The Fiend at WrestleMania. Absolutely atrocious for such a creative character, for Vince McMahon, this supposed creative genius, to have no idea how to book him. Vince and Bray notoriously clashed creatively very often, which would eventually lead to Wyatt getting released and receiving the difficult to work with label, effectively meaning that Bray simply called McMahon out for his garbage creative. Thank God this wasn't the final chapter for Wyatt in WWE, as it once seemed to be. Number 2, Dean Ambrose. Seeing Jon Moxley flourish in AEW as a no-nonsense, foul-mouthed badass has truly shown just how much WWE and Vince McMahon missed the mark with his character. Despite showing glimpses of his current best, the WWE version of Dean Ambrose always felt like a bit of a caricature. Ambrose was labeled as unhinged and a lunatic, but often came off as a bit corny and not a balanced blending of the character and the real person at times. And when WWE attempted to change Ambrose's character after many years with his 2018 heel turn, it was so dreadfully botched that it provided the nail in the coffin for Ambrose's WWE tenure. What could have been the catalyst to see Ambrose lose the shackles and show that rougher side instead saw him get dressed up as a Wish version of Bane and get inoculations on camera to protect himself from the WWE universe. Had it been a year and a half later, he might have been onto something. Rewatching that segment in particular, though, is painfully evident just how bad Mox knew the material he was given was. Nothing more than the creatively devoid, "you people are disgusting" heel heat that was so beneath Mox's talents. Just let Mox be Mox, Vince. Why did you have to make everything so lame? And number 1, almost every NXT call-up ever. Karrion Kross, Keith Lee, The Ascension, Tyler Breeze, Bobby Roode, The Revival, Rusev, Ty Dillinger, Aleister Black, Andrade, EC3, The Viking Raiders, Sanity, AOP, Hit Row, American Alpha, Hideo Itami, Pete Dunne. Okay, breathe. Probably forgetting a few, but is there anything more to say there? While there have been numerous NXT alumni that have successfully made the transition to a Vince McMahon-led main roster, the number of botched call-ups is truly staggering. And while some have stuck around or found their way back to the company recently, so many have slipped through WWE's grasp, which is a huge shame. The sheer frustration caused in seeing a character being developed for years in NXT, only to be completely gutted on the main roster, was painful. Some were given helmets, some were given totally random nicknames. Bearcat, anyone? And some were made a mute, like EC3, because of, reasons, I guess. Vince almost certainly got some sort of sick pleasure from the whole thing. That truly evil man. Thankfully, NXT is no longer treated like the ugly stepchild of the WWE, and things are looking up. The reign of McMahon terror is over. Long live the McMahon-Helmsley-Khan era, I guess. Yeah, that sounds about right. WWE, WWE, WWE. And that's our list. Did we forget your favorite wrestler that Vince McMahon never quite got? Make sure you let us know in the comments below, and make sure to like this video, subscribe, and enable notifications to always on so you never miss a fun wrestling list just like it. And watch Survival Series. I'll send you a cookie, maybe. No, I won't, but I'll appreciate it very much. Jam that jam.